Good morning, everyone. My name is Alec Ishak. I work at Viasat. I will be moderating this event. So the plan is I'm going to have all of the different panelists and give a quick little introduction about themselves. And then I have a list that Mark sent me of, I believe they were all student generated questions that I will be asking probably maybe depending on how interesting they are, 3 to 4 panelists to answer and talk about each of those. Also during this though, all the students have access to the Zoom chat. So if you have a question that you want to ask, please type it in chat. I will do my best to pay attention to whatever else is coming up in there, and I'll ask those questions as well. Or if you use the raise your hand function, either me, Mark, or Mike have the ability to then allow you to talk, and you can ask your question live as well if you would rather do that instead of typing. So I'll do my intro first, and then I'll start calling on people. So hi everyone. Like I said, I'm Alec. I work for Viasat Incorporated. They are we are a satellite broadband internet service provider, and we also do a lot of business in cybersecurity. I work in the cybersecurity side. My background is in software engineering. Viasat is the only company I have worked for out of college. I graduated from Worcester Polytechnic Institute in 2013 and 2014. I got my bachelor's and master's in robotics engineering there. So wasn't a direct step from that to doing software engineering work that I'm doing now, but it's all similar. It's all code. And I picked up whatever else I needed to know for the networking on the job. I've done a lot of different things at Viasat, and I've worn a lot of different hats, from doing like lower level embedded kind of design and protocol to doing leading software teams and stuff like that. That's kind of what I'm doing much more now, and I ended up enjoying doing software leadership more than I've enjoyed doing the some of the lower level design kind of work. What else? Let's see. I've lived all along the Northeast, from Maryland to Northern Vermont. Right now I live in Boston with my partner, and I think I'm finally in the right city. I don't plan on moving away from Boston at this point. I'm also I'm the chairperson for the Lgbtq organization that Viasat has for the 2 locations in Massachusetts that we have. Viasat has a bunch of locations across the US and the world, but I focus all of my efforts leading the groups here in the Boston and Marlborough offices. And that group kind of does have a lot of events like this where we'll go and do both community outreach, but also outreach within the company. Since most people at the company are not queer, we do a lot to just try to educate people. We always have a big Pride event in June to do something fun like that as well. What else? Outside of work, big fan of horror movies, play a lot of video games. I make my own video games on the side. Totally cool talking about that too, in addition to all the other topics people listed, but I think that's about it for me. All right, so I'm gonna go, I don't know if everyone has the same layout as me. I'm just gonna go top left and work my way down. So Jamie.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Jamie Erza. I'm an systems engineer with Raytheon, and I've been with Raytheon for about 3 years now. In the past, I've worked at places like Draper Labs and Bluefin Robotics, MathWorks, makers of MATLAB, and things like that. As a systems engineer, I can do a lot of different things, and that's what makes my job really exciting. And at Raytheon, I work with radar systems, communication systems, modeling and simulation, actually going out into the field. I was in the Middle East last year, voluntarily, by the way. I actually volunteer for that. And in addition to being a systems engineer, I'm also very much involved with Raytheon's diversity, equity, and inclusion activities, also on several ERGs, the Ray Pride ERG, for LGBTQ, the Raytheon Women's Network, and several other ones. My background is from the perspective of an electrical engineer, and mostly signal processing. Got my master's degree from University of Rhode Island a long time ago, and I identify as transgender. So yeah, I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have about the Raytheon environment. We're extremely supportive, inclusive, and it's just been a great place to work. And also happy to answer any questions about my journey just from high school through college through professional life. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. And you mentioned ERG for people in school who might not know. ERG stands for an Employee Resource Group. It's just the acronym that we all use to kind of refer to our diversity inclusions and organizations and groups like that. Thank you. Kevin.
Oh, good morning. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. So again, my name is Kevin Bonaiuto. I currently work for Quest Diagnostics, and if you don't know who Quest is, we're the world's leading provider of diagnostic information services. Basically, your doctor orders of blood work, and hopefully the test is done at Quest. You may have heard of us more recently, as we are on the front lines fighting the COVID-19 with both diagnostic testing as well as the antibody testing everyone is talking about. I currently live in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm actually born and raised here. However, I did spend some time away in between. I spent 4 years in the U.S. Army, active duty, and then came home for a little while, did some schooling, and then spent some time in New York, New Jersey. It's actually where I started with Quest Diagnostics over 15 years ago. I thought I would end up with a career in law enforcement, ended up with an associate's degree in criminal justice, but I took a right turn and ended up getting into computers. I went to school for IT and ended up, that's how I ended up at Quest, working in their IT department. And I spent a good 10 years in IT in varying degrees of leadership and things like that. Ended up getting my bachelor's degree in information technology while working with Quest Diagnostics. And then took another turn as we moved back to New England, where I currently am. I got into sales and customer solutions. And we did that about 5 years ago. I ended up with a master's degree in healthcare administration. I figured after 15 years in the healthcare field, maybe I should do some schooling there. I currently manage client services across what we call business units under the Quest umbrella for some specialty testing. I've got teams in Massachusetts and I've got teams in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm also one of the co-leaders for the Pride Network, which I think is one of the reasons why I was invited here today. And you talked about BRGs or ERGs at Quest. We call them EBNs, Employee Business Networks. The Pride Network was established at Quest in 2001, and we were actually the first employee business network. Now we've got 8 or 9 of them. That's one of the things I'm proud of Quest Diagnostics for, this diversity. We've got women in leadership, African-American business leaders, Hispanic Latino network, and one for veterans, diverse abilities, as if you can name it. Quest has got a leadership team to focus on that area. So I am married. Actually, today is my husband and I's 7th wedding anniversary. So it's kind of crazy that it's been that long. Thank you so much. Just a little bit about us. We love to eat out. We love to watch TV, and we spend time with our Frenchie, Coco.
That's awesome. Happy anniversary to you and your husband.
Thank you.
Up next is Laura.
Hey, good morning. So my name is Laura Schenyer. I am an audiologist. I work for a company called Cochlear. If you're not sure what an audiologist is, I serve as a doctor who diagnoses and treats hearing loss. I worked in the clinic for a bit, but have a very different job now that I'll get to. Grew up in Massachusetts. I currently live in Denver, Colorado, so it's a little early for me here, but I'm an early riser, so that's all right. I've been out on the West Coast. It's hard to believe, but it's been just about 10 years now. I'm not sure I'll ever come back to New England now that I've seen the big mountains out here. But did my undergraduate at Emerson College in Boston. Had a really amazing experience there, came out when I was in college and in a very open environment. Spent some time in the AmeriCorps after graduating, majored in communication sciences and disorders, so a very small science-based major at a very liberal art-centric university in Boston. And then spent a year in the AmeriCorps, so doing a lot of nonprofit work. Continued that work into my graduate degree at Arizona State. So moved out to Arizona, completed my doctorate there, and then have been out west ever since. So worked in the clinic, seeing patients day in and day out across the spectrum of audiology. So hearing tests, hearing aids, cochlear implants, bone anchored hearing aids, balance testing, the gamut. And then about 5 years ago now, joined Cochlear, which is one of the 3 cochlear implant manufacturers across the globe. We're actually the market leader with quite a bit of, we've been around the longest. We've been around for about 40 years now. But with Cochlear, I've done a couple of things. I started off working in Southern California, based in San Diego, and was a bit of a surgical and clinical expert in the clinics there. So supported all of the hospitals, surgeons, and audiologists throughout San Diego, as well as Hawaii. And then about 2 years ago, moved to Denver, which is where our US headquarters is, and now work as a clinical project manager, managing clinical trials. So that can range from the first project that I worked on was based around using artificial intelligence to program cochlear implants, and really focused on the software and more of the technology behind the computers and the things that we use to program the device that the patient is implanted with. And now I'm working on a feasibility project, more focused on the actual implant and studying the outcomes of that implant for the individual. So have kind of dabbed in a lot of things, and I feel really thankful to work for a company where I've developed quite a few skills to then translate those into potentially other fields. So although I consider myself a big ear nerd, and my license plate actually says it, I feel like the skills that I now have with Cochlear, I can then apply to if I wanted to go work in pharmaceuticals or I wanted to work for another medical device. I feel very comfortable with FDA regulated clinical trials and focusing more on the device and how that generalizes to a broader population. So outside of that, I participate in long distance triathlons. I'm one of those crazies that likes to race for 10 or 12 hours and kind of push my body to some crazy limits. I'm a huge outdoor nut, so being in Colorado, it's really fun to get into the mountains every weekend, hike, camp, do all of that stuff. I have an awesome, adorable doodle that at some point you'll probably see or hear. But yeah, my partner and I both live here and try to get outside as much as we can, at least before it snows.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I work with a lot of people from California, and so I love early meetings, and so thanks for joining us. I know I appreciate that this is early for you. Awesome. All right, Colin.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Colin Heyer, and I work for Boston Scientific. I grew up in rural Wisconsin and then moved to North Carolina and did undergrad at Duke University. I majored in biomedical engineering, which is engineering applied to medicine in so many different ways. It's such a broad field. I focus specifically on medical devices and electrical medical equipment. And then after undergraduate, did my master's degree at Johns Hopkins in bioengineering, innovation, and design. And then moved to Boston from there and started working at Boston Scientific. Boston Scientific is it's a larger medical device company. We work on a lot of different technologies. The headquarters is in Marlborough, but my division is based out of Cambridge in a smaller site, and we work on electrophysiology. So that is concerned with the electrical signals that drive your heartbeat. And we work on a surgical technology for treating tachycardias, things like atrial fibrillation. We do catheter mapping and ablation therapies. So my work there is a systems engineer for the software. I've built a wide set of skills in medical device development and the software development process as well. And I've only been there for about 2.5 years. This is my first year, my first job out of school. So I'm a bit on the earlier side of my career yet. Personally, I lived in Boston. I'm actually now working remotely and living in DC with my partner. Have 2 cats. During quarantine, started playing a lot more video games and getting outside and hiking and doing small excursions to Virginia or Maryland when we can. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Colin. Next is Michael.
Hi, all. I'm Michael. I work at Quest Diagnostics in Marlborough. I work in core lab at Quest Diagnostics in the general chemistry department. We run medical laboratory testing, the blood work you get drawn at your doctor's office or blood draw site, and the specimens come to us and we process it and acquire all sorts of medical information that we give back to your doctor. Our department handles hormones, metabolic tests, viral screening, including Kevin had indicated earlier, our department does COVID antibody testing. Other departments in the lab do the PCR testing that you may have heard of. But I'm trained in all sorts of other departments in hematology and microbiology and blood banking. But my department now is general chemistry. I went to school at Penn State. I have my associate's degree from Penn State. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and then I moved to Cincinnati, and eventually I worked on my bachelor's degree at the University of Cincinnati. And somehow I made it to the Boston area, and now I live in New Hampshire, actually. I live here with my husband for 12 years this past summer. We tend to like to travel to Montreal. That's where we actually got married at before marriage was legal. Let's see. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. When we're not at work, we just like chilling at home, movies, music. I follow a lot of Instagram dog posts, and I keep myself very busy with Instagram, especially when with all this lockdown and pandemic stuff. Just something to keep me busy.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And last is Debbie.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Debbie Cohen, and I work at Cytiva. Cytiva is a life sciences vendor. We've recently just separated from General Electric Company. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah, you just cut out very briefly, but yeah, I got you. I can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, we just recently separated from General Electric Company about 6 months ago, but we have a very long storied past over decades of beginnings as a Swedish company called Pharmacia. And we are, as a life sciences vendor, we are providing products and services for pharma biotech who are focused on biologics. So these could be engineered antibodies, it could be insulin, recently more DNA, RNA oligos, engineered proteins, viral vector technology, which is very exciting. Gene therapy market in the last few years. So we are also at the front lines of the pandemic. You find us in all of our competitors. So we are just overloaded with requests for supply. So the supply chain, which might not be talked about very often on the sound bites in the news, is something that's very critical. We're working hard on every day. My role is a product sales specialist. So I've been in the company coming up on 24 years in December, and did 5 years before in pharma biotech in various roles in the lab. But my job is to design in and support our products within a customer territory. And then I also have a dual role as a technical leader for filtration and automated systems. So, I mean, for me, it's, every day is different. And meeting people is a key part of that, something I enjoy very much. My training, my academic training is as a biochemist and from Rutgers University. So I am from New Jersey, based in New Jersey. I will tell you I am a Yankees fan from birth. So hopefully I can still stay on the panel. And a Steelers fan, so go figure.
Cut their mic. No.
Right. It's funny. Growing up as a kid in the 70s, my brother and he went Cowboys and I went Steelers just based on their Super Bowl activity. And we've gone through the lean times as well. So anyway, biochemist, but I'll tell you, I came out as a lesbian the last few weeks of my high school. I was married in 85, and that was interesting times. Went to Rutgers as an electrical engineering major with the goal to be in biomedical engineering. And I used to be ashamed to say it, but I actually failed out. I was academically dismissed because I was focused as an 18-year-old on finding community on this large campus. And engineering is not something you can do half-assed, right, as you probably know. So had to reset myself and find where, what did I like to do? Was biochemistry. I've been employed my entire career and just, been able to have really, really great activities and, start to share that, just to share for anybody who's struggling that you can come out the other side. And there are those of us who have and are happy to walk you through that. Again, this job has also created a lot of travel for me. So I've been many places around the world, 5 continents, 35 countries at my last count. Got to live abroad in Asia on a rotation. And, had in the beginnings was a bit apprehensive about going to those places, but it's really about people, and on the ground, people, we're who we are. And, there's a big difference between what we might, again, see as sound bites in the news. And there's just a lot of community out there. For me, also as a woman, very focused in those areas as well, and making sure that there are safe environments for us to grow and have opportunities. So that's one of my passions. At work, GE, I just stepped off as 10 years as leading our global operations for our LGBT network. And so in that role, created a templated process to expand our network from 3 countries to 38. So in the Americas, Europe, and Asia, and taking discussions in the remaining locations, being able to work with other NGOs, non-government organizations, essentially corporate-based nonprofits, to share best practices and, again, come together and find ways along the continuum to provide that environment for people. So again, that's where all flavors come together. I've recently at work just thrown my hat into to lead our People with Disabilities Network as an able-bodied person and an ally for that. Because we begin to see what sometimes we can get singularly focused, but we're all externally and internally, various, we can belong in various groups, and some of those where we are an ally, we're in the majority. I believe it's essential that we are a voice for those who are not, and that's how we're going to help create change. As far as fun things to do, I do love the outdoors. So when I do need elevation, we'll head west for that. And again, have mastered the side trip on my business travels, which I'm very grateful for. Again, to explore culture, food, language. I've learned to say greetings in about 20 different languages, because I didn't want to be one of those Americans going out there, and not being inclusive and just being respectful. And you'll find even just when you try, even if you're bad at it, people appreciate the effort so much, and that can carry over into anything that we're doing. And then I'll just finish with, I'm a crazy cat lady. So I'm meeting the stereotype on that. I have 6 at home that I take care of while rescues. And then with respect to travel last year, thankfully before the pandemic hit, I was able to complete all 50 states, and with Hawaii and Alaska. And for Alaska, I drove the Alaska Highway from Seattle to Fairbanks, and it was just an amazing trip. And if anybody ever gets the chance to do it, I would recommend it. Thank you.
Wow, awesome. Thanks for sharing, Debbie. Okay, so now I will get into the Q&A portion of the panel. Once again, any of the attendees, if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand virtually, and I'll do my best to pay attention to that and call on you guys as you do that, or just leave something in chat, and then I'll monitor the chat as we go through. But to get started off, I'm going to pull from the list of questions that I do have, and I want to start with something broad. What has your experience as a LGBTQ person? Wow, let me read correctly. What has your experience as a LGBTQ professional in the STEM field been like? I'm going to answer this one first, that way, selfishly, and then I'll call on other people to answer it as well. For me, I came out at work. I was not out in college. I was still trying to I was not out to myself or anyone else. I was not even really in the closet. I did not know I was gay in college. So after working at Viasat for about half a year or so, I started to come out to myself, and I started, some of the people I work with, they were some of the first people I came out to, including like my very close group of college friends that I had. And they were just the people I was seeing every day. And it kind of hit the point where it was bottled up, and I was very sick of having to, it was almost laziness. Laziness and exhaustion of having to kind of keep that in. And so I just started dropping the pronouns of the people I was going out on dates with and stuff like that to the people who I worked most closest with. And then slowly over time, that kind of spread to the people who I just knew in the office, to now I bring my partner with me to all the company events, and I'm completely and totally out, and I out myself as often as I can. And so that was interesting for me, going from not out to myself to now I'm the chairperson of 2 of the queer organizations at the company. It's been really rewarding, and it's been I'm very thankful that I have people, that I had that group of people that I worked with who were very accepting of me. When I started working at Viasat, my previous job was in Maryland, and I will leave. I don't want to name names, but I don't think I would have been the same if I had taken a job there. And I don't know if I would have actually been able to come out to my immediate team there. So I'm very thankful to have had that group who were, to them, it was, it's a very big deal to you. And these were very open, accepting people, and I did not know what to expect. And, I told them, and they were like, yeah, we know, like, you've been working on our team. We see you every day. That's fine. That was very nice. And so that was, it went from not being out at all to leading, to being the chairperson of 2 of the organizations, which has been opened up a lot of other interesting opportunities for me like this. All right. Anyone else would like to answer this question, or I can repeat it too if need be?
Yeah.
Sorry. Who? Raise hands and I'll call. I think that'd be okay. Laura.
Thanks. I was trying to find the raise hand. I'm just not sure if I have it as a panelist.
Oh, if you have video, literally raise your hand. I can see that. For the students, raise your hand and virtually, and then I'll work through that. Okay, thanks.
Sometimes I think that's my emoji, the one that's like, because I send it to a lot of people like, hello.
Oh.
So when I was invited to join this panel, I was expressing this to my partner last night. I feel like I have a bit of like imposter syndrome where I feel very grateful and I'm not sure what else, what other term to use, but I feel very grateful that I've had the opportunity to kind of in some ways walk through the world and walk through my experiences without a lot of resistance or negative experiences. And as we were talking about last night, I think it's that as being a more femme presenting lesbian, there's experiences that I just have not had, whereas she is a much more masculine presenting woman, and I think I've had some experiences in her work and how she's moved through the world. I'm also in a very female dominated field, and so just being a woman in the field that I'm in, audiology is, I think, probably one of the few. It's probably, I would say, 75 or 80% women. I don't know if it's that the audiologist is usually female and the surgeon is usually male, so it's just this interesting dynamic. But I've always had this experience where I've unapologetically been myself. I came out when I was entering college. Emerson was a very openly gay, very LGBT friendly school. It's known for that. I was surrounded by friends and family who were, for the most part, always very supportive of me. I lived in the Deep South when I was in the AmeriCorps, was very kind of open there, and allowed me some opportunities to educate others about what being who I am is like, and what meeting somebody who identifies as queer is like, because many of the people that I met in the South had never met somebody who was queer. What I find is really interesting is in my graduate career, I actually had two classmates of mine who identify as LGBT in some way. And I remember one of them saying to me, actually came out to me, and I was the only one in our entire, all 4 or 5 years of graduate students. I was the first person that she had told and came out to, and she was out in her personal life, but really felt uncomfortable being out in her professional life. And she referred to me as a bit of a guinea pig, because I came to graduate school with a partner, had been with her for several years, brought her to all of the kind of new graduate student events, all of the get-togethers, just really didn't feel shy about that. That's the way I've always moved through the world. And I remember her calling me a guinea pig because she felt like she was worried that being in Arizona, being in a more conservative, more red state, that her grades would be impacted, the way that she'd be treated by professors would be impacted by if she were open with who she was. And that never even crossed my mind. I think I've always seen the university setting as a much more liberal space, as a much more open space. And so I think for me, and then my professional career, I've always been that way as well. And so I'm grateful. And my partner and I have these really interesting conversations about our different experiences. And so I want to acknowledge the fact that I know that not everybody moves through the world in that way, but I would encourage the students that are listening to this to be as comfortable as you are, and to be as comfortable kind of presenting in the way that you feel confident in. I gratefully have not been in situations where being open and being myself and coming out as who I am from the beginning has impacted me negatively, and I recognize that that's my experience. But I would encourage you to be as open as you can in the situations that you face through school and then into your professional career.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else want to speak on this question at all? Yep, go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to share a quick story about coming out at work. We is some years ago, it was 2010, and I'd been asked to create a local LGBT group by the local HR diversity leader, and 2 years prior to that, and it had said no, and I was kind of half in, half out, and felt it would impact my job. Well, what happened was in 2009, I got laid off, and ended up being brought back into the company in a different role. But it was an eye opener for me, because it's like, well, hiding didn't keep me, from losing my job. So, then it became, let's do this and jump in. And with a colleague of mine who'd actually been at the company longer than I had, we both launched our group together, became fully 100% out, and went around and talked to our managers and our colleagues. And, it was certainly like some reaction, we knew, or is that why you were, going off to, I was in a long distance relationship at the time. Is that why you're always going on those trips that were very vaguely described? And, or people just saying, just make sure that, you can still do your day job, which is important, for us to do. And, one of there's two things that happened when we did that launch. And one is that it was like a weight off. I liken it to just taking, you had like a jacket of rocks on and pulling it off, because that summer I lost 25 pounds. I grew up in a very athletic, active life, and that's been impacted by work. But it wasn't magic. It was getting on my bicycle, but just feeling that freedom, to be myself. And, part of that was transitioning from thinking that I had to have a sign, walk around with a neon sign that said, "Let's be lesbian" on it, to just being myself. And that's what I call everyday inclusion. And I liken that, Laura, to what you were just commenting on, which I really liked, your comments on just being comfortable in who you are, and, presenting as that. So, please, continue to do that. The other thing that happened with that event is we had colleagues start to come up with us. And these are colleagues that we had lunch with, did work projects with all the time. My friend of mine came up to me and he's like, hey, my sister's a lesbian, and, I really want to join this group because I'm a strong ally, and, let's get to work. And it had never come up before. And then a woman came up to me and she's like, my daughter's in high school. I think she might be bisexual, and, let's talk about it. And so you start to see the ripple effect of just what, being yourself is, and how, again, that just comes up in everyday conversations of who we are. So, for me, I've kind of shied away, and I might, hopefully it's fair enough to bring up on this panel of, targeted days or months, because I just want to be who I am on an everyday basis, and celebrate the people who are, in community and who are allies on an everyday basis as well. So I'll just finish with, I call myself an extroverted introvert, and I was very shy when I was younger. And part of what helped me come out was the job I had in different roles, starting in a phone support role, because nobody could see me and they couldn't judge me based on how I appeared. It was just, the smile in my voice that my manager called it. And then, physically being with people, and, in the technical space, being that great looking, gorgeous person might get you in the door, but what keeps you there is your skill set, right? And then just being respectful of people and having a dialogue. And so, that's the other part of what happens in STEM, in that technical space. It's, definitely do be focused on your technical abilities, use your intelligence and use your creativity, to bring, your contributions to the world, because we really need everybody. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Let's move on to a different question now. So I would invite people who have not spoken yet to speak. I'm just bringing up the questions. why do you think there are so few LGBTQ professionals in the engineering field? Is there anyone who would like to speak on that? Sure, go ahead, Colin.
I think there's a few things. The first, I would say, I think there are many LGBTQ professionals in the STEM field. I think this question is a symptom of a larger issue of lack of representation, in which, and part of it is historical. There are a lot of important innovators and scientists throughout history who have been part of the LGBTQ community. We know of a few of them specifically, like Alan Turing comes to mind, Sally Ride. So there are many important historical scientists and people in the STEM field who are part of this community. There are also so many others. Many of them we might only be able to guess or infer because of pieces of historical anecdotes. Some of them, unfortunately, we only know about because they were forcibly outed at the time because of government policies and persecution. And so I think that has that lack of visibility has persisted to this day in a lot of ways. And another thing about the STEM field in particular is that I think a lot of times we focus a lot on the science and doing good science, which is important and necessary in this field. But I also think that that can sometimes remove the work from the people doing the work, and the people doing the work are just as important as the work itself. And I always used to think, what relevance does my sexual orientation have to my work as an engineer? And I was having these conversations when I was, trying to get my first job and wondering if I was going to be out at work and what that was going to mean for my life. And then as I thought about it more, I realized that even if my work isn't necessarily directly impacted by my sexual orientation, I still have to live and exist every day as a person, as part of this community, and working with a team of people that I need to collaborate with, who I want to trust me and know me. So it becomes a crucial part of science. And as a result, I do think it is extremely important. And so therefore, I think that hopefully this panel event and other events and organizations that I've seen pop up recently can help us increase the awareness and increase the representation so that we can truly gain an appreciation for how many scientists out there are part of our community.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Alan Turing, and I agree with that. And I remember learning I remember learning about Alan Turing in college, and then years later learning he was gay. And I'm like, I feel like you should have mentioned that when you brought up Alan Turing. You can't discuss his work and leave out the fact that he was erased from history by the British government afterwards for being gay. Yeah, I agree with that a lot. And I feel like every time I learn a piece like that, I'm like, I feel like I'm being lied to, where you're telling me only part of the story about these great thinkers who were much more than just their contribution. So Kevin, you raised your hand, I believe.
Yeah, I just wanted, I'm actually not in the engineering field, but I just want to comment on something that Colin said, right, is representation. I think that, we just had a very tense political situation going on in the country, and, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, there are more LGBTQ, politicians that are serving in all of these different political seats now. And I think that's what's really important. It coming out is a very personal thing, but if you can have the courage to be out, then you are providing that representation that is so crucial, whether it's inspiration for someone else or just making sure everyone knows that, there are these misconceptions about is there representation or not? It's about having that knowledge of, yeah, we are well represented. I can tell you that being at Quest Diagnostics and being on the leadership team for the Employee Business Network, it's not just the LGBTQ Pride Network that has an issue with self-identifying, veterans as well, right? So how many veterans are working at Quest Diagnostics? It's not a requirement to self-identify. And so when you self-identify, you're providing that information to, to a lot of leadership to say, what are our issues out there? What's our demographic look like? What are their specific needs? And so I just wanted to just comment on, it's probably a misnomer that there's not, LGBTQ people in the STEM field. It's just about representation and people feeling comfortable to self-identify.
Thanks. Anyone else want to talk on that, or we'll move to the next question? All right, I'm getting, I mentioned it in chat. Like I said, I'm sorry, my company does not use Zoom. I'm learning the interface today. I see there's a question and answer section of Zoom. So if you can send me a question through that, type it in chat. I'm getting both and I see them both. So I'm gonna pull a question from there. So one question I have is, what has been all of your experiences with trans and non-binary people in your fields? Have pronouns and names been respected? Anyone like to answer that one? Yep, go ahead, Jamie. Thank you.
So my experience, and again, this is just my experience, has been that people have been very respectful of pronouns. They've been, first of all, asking which pronoun should be used for a person, and then very consistent in using those pronouns. So it's been a very positive experience. And again, this is just a microcosm based on my experience, but yeah, it's been good.
Does anyone's companies have, I know we're trying to start something now where on your office plaque, you can offer to put your pronouns and stuff like that. And we're currently working through we're trying to figure out company guidelines to help people who might be in the middle of transitioning or for people who are in the process of changing their names. So if people want to talk about that too at their companies, I think now is a good time for it. Like I said, we're trying to figure it out, trying to get things in place. But at least Viasat recognizes that this is, I think a lot of companies are recognizing that this is, the generations get queerer and queerer. And again, I think kind of to what you said before, Colin, I think it's the same amount of queer people. It's just the amount of people who are out. And I think as more and more of that get recognized, companies are just realizing we can't just have nothing. We have to have some sort of support network there to make this work. So anyone else kind of want to talk to that? Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I want to comment on this because the Pride Network at Quest has been through quite a journey, and I'm not sure if all of you, or at least the people listening, are aware of the Human Rights Campaign and the Corporate Equality Index that comes out every year. And Quest for years was scoring an 80, and one of the things that was missing from getting 100 was having transgender policies and guidelines. And so when we finally were able to address that, since 2016 or 2017, we've now had 100% because we've been able to address that. And we've taken it a few steps further. We actually do have transgender guidelines for managers of people that are transitioning. Our health insurance now actually covers all the pre and post-op requirements for people that are transitioning or are in the process of transitioning. And then part of the Pride Network, we have a subgroup called Trans Pride, and we have a transgender leader who handles that piece of things. And I tell you that's, going back to my previous comments, every time I go to her to ask her about opinions or her advice or perspective on things, I keep going to her, and it's just, it's an underrepresented group that needs a lot of attention. We just had a call last week about suicide awareness. And, you know, there are a lot of high risk categories, but especially transgender women of color. And these are issues that we want to address and need to spend a lot of focus on. But I can tell you that Quest has always been diverse and accepting, but I'm proud of the evolution that they have taken in this area, but it still needs a lot of attention.
Yep, go ahead, Jamie.
Yep. So Raytheon has been really, really great in this regard. Starting back in the 2000s, Raytheon implemented policies for supporting transgender people both before, and during, and after transition, covering 100% of medical costs. What Kevin had mentioned about the HRC Equality Index, I think we've been getting 100% for something like 12 years in a row. So from a company perspective, it's been great. And we haven't stopped. We're continuing on. For example, making bathroom policies that are inclusive across the board, not just in one location. So we're a worldwide company, and even within the United States, there are certain areas that lag behind in terms of diversity and inclusion, and particularly with respect to transgender issues. So we're bringing everybody aboard and making sure that our policies and our inclusiveness is really reflective throughout not just the U.S., but all the countries that we have offices in and engineers working in.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm gonna go for the next question that I have received. This one might be harder. How has the government's policies affected your lives? What do you think the solutions are to modern day sexual discrimination? I want to talk to the second part of that one quickly. Maybe not quickly. I've struggled with that a little bit. I try to be politically active in a way to make life better for all queer people. But it is very difficult to affect change beyond a certain boundary. You know, even at a federal or state level, that's difficult. And I had to kind of make peace with the fact that I cannot unilaterally affect change across, you know, the United States of America. And so I found that for me, the best way that I've been trying to combat discrimination is on a much more local level. And it's trying to, if you can, as exhausting as it is, talk with people who might be uninformed to homophobic, somewhere on that scale. And I think in that direct message and connection with people, you're more likely to make them realize that, you know, we are people and that we deserve the same respect that other people need. It's not easy to have that kind of conversation with people over and over again, because a lot of times it's not a one-time conversation. But in my experience, the best solution has always been on a more local, smaller level. The more focused you can make that message, the more effective it's going to be, the more you can tailor it to that audience that you're working with. And the closer you can move things forward. And no, you're not going to be able to, you personally are not going to be able to go do that, every single person in the world. But there are a lot of us who are having that conversation and making tiny steps everywhere. And together you can shift and you can move and you can change mind like that. That's why it's like I said, you know, at Viasat, most and everywhere, most people are not queer. But we host these events and you talk about the basics over and over. You talk about the difference between gender and sex, all this over and over. These people don't live that as part of their lives. So you just talk about it, they learn, and you just affect change on that kind of small scale, and mini small scale changes will eventually result into more of a countrywide and global mindset to change. At least that is my thoughts. If people have different experience on that, I'm sure other people have this. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Michael, sorry, I was.
Yeah, I want to echo your sentiment about respect. I think that most of society wants to understand. There's going to be always a portion of society that doesn't care, doesn't want to care. They'll just do what they want to do. Those people are not necessarily who we can reach. And so I try to focus my attention and effort, because it takes a lot of energy sometimes, sometimes energy that I don't have, that I want to advocate to connect on respectful levels, and advocate for the people that don't have voices. I'm a white guy, and I recognize that I have that privilege of maybe having a microphone that I want to give to someone else, between intersex people, non-binary, pansexual, transgender. There's so many people that are part of our community that don't even get even respect amongst our own families, communities in general. But then also bringing that to the outside world, so to speak, to our employer communities. That can be difficult, how to bridge that gap. But I find that connecting on a respectful level and trying to meet people where they are, even if it might be what it seems to be hostile, it's a lot of the times not really hostile. They just don't know how to connect themselves. So sometimes getting that insight a little bit is kind of necessary. Once you know that how people need to connect, it's so much easier. And all it takes is just one tiny little connection, some sort of similarity or whatever, that it would help people to try to understand people that are not like them at all whatsoever. As far as government policies, I mean, our community has been affected immensely since I think it was 2009, when marriage laws, discriminatory marriage laws were struck down. I ended up having to amend income taxes for 3 years, I think. So just things that people don't necessarily even think about have affected a lot of us, depending on how long you've been married. Yeah, my mind is going off track here, but that's just part of some of the things that are on my mind.
Yep. Thank you. Yep, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, so as you asked that question, as I'm listening to you talk, there's two things that I'm thinking about. So I think for me, there's been, this is something I've really struggled with in the political space, and that I've never considered myself an incredibly politically driven person. And so I feel my approach and what's come to light is the kind of events of this summer, right, and more around the Black Lives Matter movement. In Denver, I live probably just a handful of blocks away from the Capitol, and so it's been a very lively, for lack of a better word, summer, right? And in the wake of many of the events that were happening earlier this summer, I really found myself struggling with how I could show up for that. And I think it falls very much in line with how I've shown up as a queer woman. And I've never been somebody who's, I've attended pride parades and I've attended different events, and I'm very active in our diversity inclusion committee at work and things like that. But being the person that shows up in protests and is there in person and is physically providing some type of support has not particularly aligned with me as an individual. And so I think the approach that I've had in these different spaces has been really around educating myself and staying as informed as I can. And so I am, as I'm sure all of the panelists are on this call, somebody who very much likes to take in information and do research and be kind of a sponge for knowledge. And so I think from a political standpoint, I think one, in line with others, take the view of educating others, right? And being as informed as I can to be able to engage in conversations that are meaningful and are providing accurate information, right? And representing in a way that is true. And I think the other piece is that I really want to make sure that I'm as up to date as I can be, right? And so when I sit down to fill out my ballot, right, every November, whether it's a primary or a midterm election, I make sure that I'm as well informed as I can to make decisions and to vote for individuals and to vote for ballot measures that, if they apply to this particular topic or are individuals that could potentially impact my life as somebody who identifies in this community, that I'm doing that as informed as I can. And so I think along the lines of other people on this panel, I don't feel like my one voice or my one action is going to make this monumental change. But I know that it's, I like to say it's kind of a little bit every day for over a long period of time, right? That what can I do every day to show up and be as informed and as accurate as I can be, whether that's in the language that I'm using or the facts that I'm bringing to a particular conversation on the topic.
Thank you. Yep, go ahead, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the person who asked the question. From a government policy standpoint, I mean, historically, in the past, when I was looking at my own career, I was considering some roles where that would have been government related, so still in the engineering focus. And, there's security clearance questionnaires. So we, myself and friends became very quickly aware of that. And actually that dissuaded some of us from taking those steps forward. So thankfully those are, that has changed. But some people might still be uncomfortable, and even just on a tangent to that for a moment, sitting there, if you still feel apprehensive about that, that's okay too, because sometimes we can get into a place where we think, and I've had people say, well, everything's okay now. Marriage equality happened at the federal level in 2015, and we saw a big drop in our U.S. activity in our employee resource groups, not abroad, because people thought, well, we're done. Maybe that's a whole nother discussion. A lot of ERG focus for us is around professional development, which is always going to be an activity to do. So it's, understanding, please, take the time to learn what was before and what's now, because just because something has changed doesn't mean it can't step back. And so we do see that it's this back and forth cycle, depending on which I was going to say regime, which party is in office. But you can see from this election, how much have you looked at the data? Because I was looking at some data recently and seeing that between 2016 and 2020, the percentage of LGBT community who voted Republican went from 16%, was it 16 and doubled, or whatever the number was, it doubled. And, and there's a group called Log Cabin Republicans, which my friend, when I started a group at work in 2010, he was a part of, and I had no idea what it was. And, first it became like, how can you be a part of that group, to like, hey, let me understand, what that means to you. And for my own evolution, it's become, what I call going from a screaming session to an education session. Lauren, you touched on that as well. I think it's Mike, really important to understand what's important to other people. Because not everybody's going to vote. Doesn't have the priorities for me. Since I started voting when I was 18, it's women's health, women's access to reproductive health care. I did marches in Washington back then when I was in school for that, and for the gay community, lesbian gay community back then. And, that's what's important to me, but it might not matter to everybody else. I'm sure people here on this panel will have different focus than me, and that's okay as well. But I do agree that change happens in the trenches. There used to be a popular bumper sticker that said, think globally and act locally. And so it comes down to the elections are not just about the federal level or even the state level. Our local communities are very important, because I can tell you that whatever on the other side, you're very well organized, very well focused and funded. And when we wonder, how did they make that change? It's because they've taken those steps. The challenge historically in our community has been that we're so fractured. We've got a lot of letters floating around as well. And so that can also help contribute to, being distracted here and there. So it's part of, for this community, is finding, that common ground and focusing and mobilizing in that direction. I'll also just leave you with, sometimes it can feel like there's the weight of the world on us, and it's okay to take a break. And just self-care is so important. We all need to be here for the long term, contributing with bring whatever special, skill set we have. That's really important. So don't feel that, that it's bad to step away. Do that and create some routine for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, and I think that is so important. Kind of even Michael, you touched on it too. It's like, it's not everyone is going to be equivalently easy to reach, and it is going to be varying energy levels from easy to impossible for you to do alone, and recognizing what you as a person can do and what versus what us as a community can do is really important. How has STEM changed in the past 5 years, and what do you predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years within the STEM fields? Anyone want to talk about that to start? If not, I can start. Go ahead, Laura.
So I certainly can only speak to the ear specific, I suppose, and health related medical field that I work in. But I think this applies kind of more broadly. And I think a great book that speaks to this is a book called Deep Medicine by Eric Topol. He's a researcher out of the Scripps Institute in San Diego. But I think there's been a really big shift in STEM to more remote or kind of distance technology. And so a lot of this, we think about in the space, even just in the summer, I think we're moving so much more towards a space where we can do things virtually and move towards meeting and working and seeing patients and doing research and doing all of this connection through a variety of venues. And so I think providing telemedicine to patients, I think programming devices, delivering medical care through a telepractice type access is one huge thing. I think the other piece that I see a big change in is the use of artificial intelligence in a variety of different applications. And so, and that's specifically what that book is about, is how are we applying artificial intelligence to not only in the medical space, but in the smartwatches that we use, in the delivery of medications, in gathering information and using that data to advance our technology as we move forward. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's moving much faster than anything has before. I think it's very similar to the development of computers, right? And that field moves so quickly over a short period of time that we're in this space where we're able to use robots and artificial intelligence to advance things in a way that we are limited in a physical capacity as human beings.
Yep, go ahead, Debbie.
Thanks for bringing up AI, Laura. I'm going to focus on the gene therapy, cell therapy, gene editing space, which is, it's nascent in the last few years, but from the hard work of people that started 20 years ago. So in that respect, as you go through your careers as young people, things that, someone had to make the start. So that could be you as well, again, with your idea. But I think from what we're starting to see is the actual cure of disease states that in the past or even still in current day have either resulted in, being terminal, for infants, young children, or even adults, where we've just been able to maintain a quality of life, which could be as short as 6 months or maybe a few years, before that person passes, to where now we're actually going to be able to fix what has been wrong. So it'll be interesting to see how that advances. It's certainly changing things up with respect to the cost. You can have a one-time treatment that's $2 million versus, a maintenance of a disease state that's, $80,000 a year, but over the lifetime would be more expensive. So there are other things that come into play with, funding in healthcare systems and who's going to pay. Certainly people are asking, is it really, costing that much? But when we understand the science of what it takes to develop and then produce that on a manufacturing level, which is the space that we're in at Sativa, is working with those companies who are doing that, we can at least begin to understand and have a foundation, for why that is, and then maybe take some, smaller discussions on that. So that's definitely something to watch.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
At Quest Diagnostics, because it is, like I had referred to earlier, is becoming an automated medical laboratory. In the past, before the Marlborough location opened, lab techs would take a sample received from the doctor's office, manually gather all these tubes, put it in a centrifuge, press a button, it spins and separates out blood components, and then it stops. We take the tube out, put it on an analyzer manually, press go. The analyzer does its thing. We get a report, take the sample, put it in a refrigerator for just in case. All of that has changed on a very large scale in the past 5 years at Quest Diagnostics. We've taken all of what would typically happen to a sample that you give to your doctor, and we automate from reception of the sample to discarding the sample, given that the sample is sufficient to go on automation. We don't have to touch the sample ever. Yes, we still have to wear protective gear, gloves, everything, because just the nature of what we do. But for the vast majority of samples that come into the laboratory, we don't have to touch anything because it is so automated. When our location opened, we were the world's largest automated medical laboratory. And now we are already being dwarfed. And it's only going to get bigger for other laboratories around the country for Quest Diagnostics. And along the information side of things that Quest Diagnostics deals with, we are using EHR, which is electronic health records. All of that is being automated now, digitized, so that in essence, we're dealing with diagnostic information, and I think Kevin possibly could talk about that too. But all of this has just blown up in the past few years, and again, it's going to just keep growing, which goes into more information technology and networking type of things, protecting that information. That's going to be huge in the next few years.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I guess to speak to the software side of things in automation, it's the same story. Like I said, my background is in robotics engineering, and Viasat looked at that and said, cool, so you can do AI and automation stuff. And that's so much of what I've been doing.
You're muted, Alec.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Thanks. Yeah, sorry about that. I wanted to kind of speak to the software side of automation too. It's the same story. Like I said, I majored in robotics engineering, and Viasat looked at that and said, okay, cool, so you can do artificial intelligence and automation. And that's what I've been doing for my technical work for the past, couple, 5, 6.5 years. The closer you can get to building your product and then pushing a button and that product getting built, tested, verified, signed, and then distributed to all of your customers, the better off you're going to be. This was a big thing that like Facebook, Amazon pioneered, and now every company is realizing how much faster you can release products if you are just automated. There's always kind of the concern that, automation is going to replace factory jobs or all of these physical labor tasks. They're also going to replace all of these technical things that people needed to do as part of like a software release process. So I think that's going to be kind of happening now. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, if you are being able to solve a problem is very useful. And I think that is always going to be what people in STEM are going to be doing. But I think the new problems are going to be, how can you automate problem solving? And we're moving closer and closer to finding out how we can do that. Let's move on to another question. Also, Debbie did send me a message. She had to drop off. I believe she had another appointment. So bye, Debbie. Let's see. Some more of the STEM questions that we have. What effect have STEM fields made within the business community? I kind of want to start with that because I think STEM, because so much of the work, at least for me as a software engineer, does not need to be done in person. I can connect to all of my hardware. It's in California, in beautiful sunny San Diego. I'm here in Boston, Massachusetts. I don't have to be near it. I'm the only person on my team in this time zone. Everyone else is in either West Coast or Mountain Time. If I wanted to change jobs, I don't need to be limited to my zip code and places within like that I can drive to, even more so now. I think that is now maybe painfully apparent to everyone if you're able to work from home. And so I think that because a lot of these like software engineering jobs can be done remotely, I think other businesses that have the ability to maybe do that are recognizing, oh, we're not just pulling from a talent pool in around us, we're pulling from a talent pool globally, maybe nationally, depending on what your business is. And so I think the good news is you have a lot more options of what you want to do. Bad news is you're potentially competing against way, way, way more people. That being said, I think there are, in the technical fields, depending on what you want to do, you can be specialized enough, I think, with this kind of wide-reaching hiring, where if you are really interested in doing like just laser focusing on one particular aspect within software, even you don't have to know how to do everything. You can really, really focus, and you'll find the company that needs that exact role filled. So I think that's kind of how, I think that kind of started in STEM. And I think, I mean, Laura, you said you're doing telemedicine, which to me, I'm still nervous about doing that. I have a telemedical appointment with like my physician, and I'm like, don't you have to touch like my check things? And I'm still getting over that kind of like, how does this work? And so I think that's kind of moving now into other fields. Anyone else want to talk to that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to add to that, so we actually, like the direct application of that, so we actually just launched an app that the patient can download on their phone, and they go through a 5-step like assessment. So in replacement of the patient's annual check, they can come in and assess these 5 things, and it sends that data to their audiologist to look at, and the audiologist can then recommend the patient to come in for an appointment, or say, yep, looks like everything is great, you're performing well, and you can just kind of go on your way and check in with me in another year or sooner if you have issues. So that type of application is really interesting, particularly in the field of cochlear implants. So some of you might not even know what a cochlear implant is. So a cochlear implant is an electrode that has 22 contacts in it that is inserted into the patient's cochlea, which is the smallest organ in your body. It's about the size of your pinky fingernail. And so there's a small electrode array that's 22 contacts that's inserted into that organ and replaces hearing with electrical stimulation. And so to think about kind of programming that, it was a very small field, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, where there were only a handful of centers across the US that were working with these devices. So patients traveled quite a distance to receive them at times, and to have them programmed. So to think about that field of telemedicine and being able to provide that programming and to assess the patient when they're in their own home just really expands the possibility. And so it's just really interesting to think about all of those different things and how we're applying them. I think you're right in the remote space, that for those of us who are working in these areas, to be able to kind of be anywhere and provide and work in that space is really interesting. I mean, I have an office that I now go into, but well, not right now, it's currently shut down, but when I was working in California, I was working from home, and I covered every hospital in Southern California and traveled to Hawaii every 3 to 4 months, right? But I was constantly providing this kind of on-the-go support. And I think it's interesting to think about the scope of your network and the scope of kind of the possibilities of jobs that you can apply for regardless of where you are, right? That if I were to seek out a new job, I could look for something in Boston, I could look for something and I think that's one nice thing about if there is any nice things about the pandemic, it's kind of one of the nice things, right, is that we can, I mean, several people on this panel, right, have moved to other states or are living in a different place where they are able to work and have access to their colleagues in a way that we haven't before. And so it's really nice to think about in some places, I work for a company that's global, right? Most of my colleagues are global headquarters in Sydney, right? So would it be possible for me to have a job in a different country, right? And still live in the US. And what does that look like? And so not limiting myself to only things that are within Denver or within driving distance, but really being able to expand that network and expand those opportunities is really exciting to think about.
Cool, thanks. I noticed there's a couple questions relating to this topic, and I'm gonna present them all at once. And if you want to talk about any of them, please speak up. These are going back to a couple LGBTQ focused questions that I think might be important still for a high school audience. Is it important for LGBTQ students to have a mentor? Are there any professional groups, LGBTQ professional groups that you can join as a student? What colleges or universities would you suggest that are accepting of LGBTQ students? And are there any scholarship opportunities for LGBTQ students that are majoring in engineering college? All kind of like moving into that high school to college, and then, you know, I guess even if you want to take it there, college and afterwards kind of space. Questions there, if anyone has. I'm actually kind of curious. I don't know the answer to any of those. Anyone want to talk to those? Student groups? Yeah, go ahead, Michael. You're muted.
Sorry. I can't answer as far as LGBT student groups, but as far as my my professional background, I am registered with the American Society for Clinical Pathologists, and they have free membership for students of laboratory students and also medical students. That is an option if you were interested in medical technology or medical lab technology. As maybe add in there also for mentoring. I think that'll, in my perspective from my growing up, I probably would have liked someone to bounce ideas off of, and I was kind of isolated to some degree where I lived. So having a mentor probably would have been good for me, but I would say it's not necessary. It just depends on your personality and how you connect with others. With all this online social media interactivity, you'll have that if you know where to look for it. But by all means, connect whenever you can.
Thanks. Go ahead, Kevin.
I just want to touch on the mentorship. I do think mentorship is really important, whether it's, you know, in the queer community or not. I think, you know, one thing I've always tried to do in my professional career is look for someone who's not in my direct, you know, sort of chain of command, to speak military term. Someone who I think is, you know, in a place where I'd like to be someday, but also someone who I know can give me feedback, you know, that is sort of not tied to any, you know, position that they're particularly responsible for, right? That they're just going to give you honest feedback about maybe some other positions within the company that you might be good for, or what it would take to get into certain positions that you're interested in. You know, for instance, I just was asking a mentor of mine a few years ago, I want to go back to my master's. Do I need to do an MBA, or should I do a master's in a particular field? And what's sort of the trend these days? What are people looking for? But another thing I just want to mention, that the Pride Network at Quest Diagnostics is actually launching a mentorship program. And that's going to help, you know, young professionals connect with leadership and get that networking and exposure. But the other thing that we're also looking at is reverse mentorship and giving our senior leaders an opportunity to sort of be mentored by young LGBTQ professionals and understanding, you know, what are their concerns, what are their needs, so that way when they're making decisions at the top, that they have that information with them. So that's something I'm really excited that we're hopefully we'll get into. We wanted to get into 2020, but you can all imagine something happened in 2020 that derailed us a little bit. But hopefully next year we'll be able to spend some time focusing on that program.
Thanks. Yep, go ahead, Colin.
To the question about organizations or professional groups, I wanted to drop a couple of organization names that I'm personally aware of. And admittedly, I've interacted with these groups locally in Boston. So unfortunately, I can't speak to if a particular city or state or region has a chapter. Hopefully the answer is yes. But for Massachusetts, I know there's a group called OutBio. OutBio does networking events, or at least pre-pandemic. I think post-pandemic they've done some virtual ones also, but pre-pandemic
they are. I'm also.
Are you part of
I'm not in OutBio, but I'm aware of them. Like just because I'm a queer person in the city. Like my partner is in the biotech field, and he's closer in with them and what they do.
Yeah. So they do. So OutBio, it's one subset of STEM, so your interests may or may not fall into this, but it's been a cool network for people working across different fields of biology, biotech, pharma. It was usually hosted or put on by like a pharmaceutical company in Cambridge, and then there was a networking session. So there may be other chapters in other cities. The other organization I wanted to mention was OSTEM, and as far as I know, OSTEM is centered. It has chapters that I think are more university centric. So in OSTEM, they've started in the university space, and I think are still branching out to having more geographic based chapters. But those are for students at universities, and I think they're interested in growing and expanding their connections between the universities and professionals. Also, it looks like OutBio is specific to Boston. So at least, sorry, Laura, but at least locally, could still check it out and see if you're interested.
Yeah, I just dropped a link to OutBio and OSTEM in the chat if people want to go look at it. I kind of feel the same way about these professional organizations. The way that I feel about how I answered the activism question is find a local one. They'll be able to help you better. The national ones are nice. Like I was a member of IEEE for a long time, but it's good to kind of be aware of what's going at that higher level, but they're not going to necessarily, then there is a local IEEE chapter. Those are the ones that are going to actually be able to direct you and mentor you. Oh crap, for those of you that don't know, IEEE, I don't remember what it stands for. It is a professional electrical engineering organization. You don't have to be an electrical engineer to be a member, but that is their primary target audience. Like look for a more local group. They will be able to direct you better. Yeah, talk about it, Jamie.
Okay, there we go. So IEEE Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. But anyways, I wanted to add in two other organizations that I'm familiar with that have local Boston chapters. One is NOGLSTEP, which is National Organization of Gay and Lesbian Scientists and Technical Professionals, which is a mouthful. But they have partnered with OSTEM for OSTEM's conferences on several years. So NOGLSTP. And the other one is there's a group called Lesbians Who Tech, who was founded on the West Coast. They have chapters worldwide, like 30,000 members. And there is a Boston chapter too. So those are two local places that folks can reach out to for more information.
Those two I'm not familiar with. Would you mind dropping a link in chat like I did? Even though you spelled out NOGLSTEP, I did not get it fast enough.
Sure. Okay.
All right. What time? We still got 12 minutes. So we have time for another question. I think it's maybe a good one to kind of close out with. What are the most critical changes that we must make to face the future effectively? You don't want to start with that one? I will. I'm happy to. This is from a cynicism of the world perspective. I have a lot of climate anxiety. And so I try to do, this is another thing, trying to work locally and figure out what I can change in Boston so that we can reverse our direction with global climate change and what we can do there. But that's not my field. And so I'm there as a person, but not there as like a technical resources that knows about environmental biology. I think what I do know, coming from a cybersecurity software tech background, is I think we are currently facing, and we are going to continue to face a a lot of challenges when it comes to credibility and reliability of online sources, whether this is, social networks, how that data that social networks collect and how they use that. I think we're starting to, I think now that is the concerns about data aggregation, that what they do are starting to become more public. They've been doing it for a while. And I think we're going to have to figure out a way to manage it. They're not going away. Instagram's not going anywhere. Like these things are here to stay. And we as a society need to learn how to critically think about things. And it's okay. I'm not saying uninstall these things, although I don't use a lot. I do use Instagram, but I do not use Facebook or TikTok or a lot of others. I think just be aware of what they do, be aware of, advertisements that are getting pushed toward you and how that data is getting used. It's a very big, complicated topic that I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about it. It's just something I personally am very interested in. And I think, the question to face the future effectively, I think we talked about having personal conversations and figuring out how to actually connect with people. I think, although the original intent of these social networks were to make it easier for us to connect to people, it has bubbled us really effectively, like really, really effectively. And I think we have to now undo that work and actually unbubble ourselves, as uncomfortable as that is for us and for the other people, because we're all stuck here and we have to do that. So I think that'll be a very interesting thing that people in and outside of the engineering world are going to have to face. Anyone else want to talk about that? No. Big intimidating question. That's fine. Let's see. I can pull out some other stuff. How about this? What are some ways that we can make substantial changes in the workplace? So not necessarily STEM, but making things better for people in the workplace. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
I think one of the biggest things for anybody who wants to make changes is listen. You have to listen. If you're not willing to listen, you might as well just talk to a wall, because someone else could just be talking to the wall. I'm sorry. If we're not willing to listen, we're just talking past each other. We're just blocking people out. It makes for a very aggravating work environment. This goes beyond the LGBTQ community, reaching out to allies and people we're trying to give a more open-minded perspective. It could be about politics or whatever. You have to listen. You have to be open-minded to other people, regardless if you agree with them or not. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. Go ahead, Kevin.
I think just being engaged, right? I think that, you know, maybe the, you know, workplace was sort of always separate from personal, that work-life balance that we talk about. And I think that this pandemic, right, with so many people, you know, are working remotely, it's that those worlds are colliding and blending more than they have in the past. And I think we need to be more, I think if we're just more open, right, with what's going on in our workplace and home, and seeing how those things really are connected. I think that, you know, when one of the things that we talk about at Quest Diagnostics with the employee business networks, all these different diverse groups that we talk about, that people who are part of these groups are more engaged at work and therefore typically are more productive and actually stay longer with the company. And so, you know, especially as you enter your career and get into the field, you know, you may not realize that you can affect change, or you may be frustrated with something that's not working and it might make you leave or go somewhere else. I always think of stay around and get into a position where you can actually make change. And so I would just say stay engaged and, you know, make sure your voice is heard.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, I guess just to build off of what Kevin said, I think it's engagement is a huge piece, and being curious is a huge part of it too. I mean, I think I've become more curious over the last probably year or so about the culture and the environment that I'm working in. You know, I think like most companies in this climate that we're in right now, we for the first time are creating like a diversity and inclusion committee, right? We have this huge people and culture department, but and people who are employed to work in that space. But in the past probably 6 to 12 months is where we've started to kind of like open that door and be more curious about what diversity and what the culture is more at our company. And I think as you enter into exploring different universities and then into your career, it's not only about what you bring from a skill set and what you bring as an individual, but it's also about what that company provides to you and what that career offers to you. And so it has to be a kind of back and forth. And so I think it's important for you to be curious, to ask questions about those things and really make sure that the environment that you're entering into or potentially entering into is going to be one that is supportive of you and a place where you're going to be valued not only for your skill set, but also for what you bring to the table as an individual and all those different parts of you.